Today we're looking at this 66 Mustang, and we're going to install the QA1 Mustang Pro Coil kit for the 64 to 73 vehicles. Currently this is set up as a drag car. The ultimate goal is to make it a little more streetable, maybe participate in some autocross or track days. So installing this kit on the front should help significantly. So here's the kit as it comes from QA1. We went with a double adjustable shock option. There's a few different options there. You could go single adjustable or a 90-10 drag race style valving. But for our purposes, driving on the street, maybe doing some autocrossing, allowing us to control the compression and rebound independently is the right choice for us. We also went with a 400-pound spring. There's a few options there depending on the weight of the vehicle. You'll see the kit also comes complete with all the hardware you'll need, as well as a new shock tower mount. What we like about this kit is it's going to allow us to adjust the ride height to up to 2 inches lower, and it's a complete bolt-in installation. Right off the bat, you can see a difference between the QA1 kit and the stock. The through-bolt design and material itself is going to make this a much more durable option. Again, in looking at this top mount, you'll see how this through-bolt design is just much stronger than what we had on the stock setup. You'll also notice the diameter of the piston rod, how robust this is versus the one we're removing. And then again, we get the adjustability with the QA1. 18 clicks of compression, 18 clicks of rebound for a total of 324 different settings, ride settings we could have for this vehicle. Let's take a quick look at the lower mount setup as it would go on the control arm, the T-bar style versus what we're removing. So while we have the shock and upper control arm off of the vehicle, you can kind of see how this all goes together. We have the shock and 2 bolts connecting to the spring perch, and then we have the spring perch with 2 bolts connected to the upper control arm. This just creates a lot of points of failure. We have rubber pads right here that could go bad, and you can already see the deterioration on the rubber bushing there. The QA1 system is much cleaner. We'll take a look at that next. So here we have the QA1 shock mocked up. You can see how this sits on the upper control arm with this T-bar and polyurethane bushing versus these 4 bolts and the rubber bushings and pads from the stock shock. Also of note is we've gotten rid of all this bulky spring perch piece, and this is where the spring would sit on the QA1, right on the shock body itself. This allows us to adjust to about 2 inches lower to lower that front end of the vehicle. So now we're ready to install the kit on the vehicle. First thing we need to do is get a base ride height. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure from the ground, with the vehicle on the ground, we're going to measure from the ground to the top of the center of the wheel well. On this vehicle, we're right at 27 inches. So now we're ready to get the vehicle in the air. We have a 4-post lift. If you don't have that at home, you can always use a jack and be sure to secure it with some jack stands. But we're ready to get the wheel and tire off and get going on the install. Now that we got the sway bar end links removed, it's time to work on getting the shock and spring out. To do this safely, we got to remember that the spring is going to have some stored energy. So we've got the lower control arm supported with a jack. We're going to start by removing those 2 nuts that hold the shock to the spring perch. So now that we have those 2 nuts off, you can see the shock is loose on that spring perch. What we're going to do next is lower the jack, which lowers the control arm, and you can see how much actual stored energy there was in that spring. If we were just replacing the shock, we would remove those 2 bolts connecting the shock to the shock tower cap. We're going to be replacing that as well with the QA1 kit, so we're going to remove those 3 bolts. So we used a spring compressor to remove some of that pressure on the spring seat, and actually there's a little gap there now. So now we're ready to remove these bolts that connect the upper control arm to that spring perch. We're gonna completely remove that assembly. So with the spring and the spring seat out, we're ready to begin assembly of the new QA1 kit. So with everything off the vehicle, we're going to start assembling the QA1 kit and get that ready to put on. Of note, which was kind of cool, is we weighed the springs that we took off with what the new high travel spring from QA1 weighs, and it's like a 4 pounds difference, 11 pounds to 7 pounds. So that's a considerable weight savings. We also see made in the USA, which is always a good thing. But in looking at the shock and getting that ready to put on, the first thing we have to do is slide this lock nut all the way down to that last thread. You'll see there's a little shoulder. We got to make sure we keep that up. Then we slide the spring seat adjuster nut all the way down, and that's got a little stainless washer on here. If you had the thrust bearing kit, you could use that. We're not going to use that today. But we're going to slide that all the way down, and now we're ready to put a little anti-seize on these threads and get the spring on. So we're back under the hood, ready to install the shock tower cap. One of the cool things that we liked about the QA1 kit over some of the other ones on the market was this is a true bolt-on kit. We do not have to drill. We do not have to cut anything. We're using the factory carriage bolts along with the factory locations. One of the things we notice here is these are kind of stuck in here. This one fell out, so when we do install this, we just got to make sure we put some pressure on the underside of this carriage bolt when we get that nut on. With the spring properly seated on the adjuster nut and the spring isolator in place at the top, we're ready to get that spring into the spring pocket and get this T-bar mount onto the upper control arm. So to do this, we noticed we're gonna need to make that T-bar flush to the upper control arm. So we're just using some vice grips to do that. Then we'll get some bolts through there and just make sure it stays in place. So with the lower mount connected, we're going to work on the upper mount. To do that, we have to make sure the spring is properly seated up top here. And we're going to use a jack underneath that lower control arm to help compress that spring to align this upper mount. We're using all the supplied hardware from QA1. So with the car still in the air, we're going to reinstall those sway bar end link bushings, make sure those are in. And this is also a good time to look at our base settings for our shocks. From the factory and to install it, our knobs are turned all the way counterclockwise to the softest setting. In the instructions provided from QA1, they give us some base settings depending on what we're doing with the vehicle, from drag racing, comfortable street performance, autocross, road race. For this Mustang, we're gonna wanna probably start at that street performance level, which they recommend 8 to 10 clicks for both compression and rebound. So we'll start turning these. So we got the compression turned clockwise, 10 clicks. We're gonna work on the rebound next. The nice thing about each of these clicks, you can both feel it and hear it. It's very distinct, so there's no doubt when you've made that click. So this can be done, obviously like we're doing now when the vehicle's in the air or when the vehicle's on the ground. So when you go to a track day, you can make the adjustments for how the track conditions are that day or how you want the vehicle to handle. And when you're driving the vehicle home, you can turn it to a more comfortable street setting. So also while we have the vehicle in the air, it's a good time to just talk about adjusting the ride height. We'll have to get the vehicle down, the wheel back on and everything to get it exactly how we want and level with the other side. But for now, let's just talk about it. We have the anti-seize on that thrust washer right now, which will help with this. QA1 also makes a thrust bearing kit, which really helps if you're having a lot of difficulty. But basically all we're gonna do is use a spanner wrench. We have it at the lowest setting now. And if we want to raise the ride height, we're just gonna do it with that spanner wrench. So now that we have both sides completely installed, torque down, we've got the vehicle on the ground, we've moved it back and forth a little bit, we've pushed down on each quarter panel to let that suspension completely settle. Let's get that final ride height measurement now and see where we're at. So if you remember, we were right at just shy of 27, right at 27. Now we're just a little bit short of 25, so it is that complete 2-inch lower that we were looking for with this vehicle. We are done installing the QA1 Mustang Pro Coil kit on this 66. We got to go get it aligned still. Anytime you're messing with the suspension, it's a good idea to get an alignment. One thing that was cool that we noticed was, by using those double adjustable shocks, we can still use this wheel and tire package at some point if we want to take this car back drag racing. We can firm up the compression and really ease back on that rebound. We'll still have good performance in that regard. Overall, we found this kit really easy to use, completely bolt-in, made in the USA, really high quality components.